you nodding? Is there anything you want to add to that? Because I have a little addition too, I think.
Well, I think Rod is, on the money with his commentary. I think it's important to decouple two separate conversations. Conversation number one is inevitable, which is AI is an enabling technology and capability that will bring immense value to companies, people, so on and so forth. Really, the question is, going back to the .com, movie that we've seen, is who's going to be the Amazon, and then who will be the rest. The second conversation, which Rod touched on, which maybe strikes a different kind of nerve, is the financial markets conversation around AI. The fact that the valuation of the hyperscalers and the foundational model providers is contingent on the arithmetic that everybody in the world will use it at a certain rate. That's a different conversation altogether that I think obscures and clouds the value conversation, which at least, knock on wood, for most people is the more valuable one versus sort of the financialization conversation.
Yeah. What I'm noticing, especially as I go in to talk to, we do a lot of business with mid-market, all the way from lower mid-market to upper mid-market. When I'm speaking to those CFOs and CEOs, they've tried this before. You guys have already mentioned it. There's a lot of failure rates happening in terms of pilots and this pivot. So they knew they had to do it. They started doing it, but we know the reasons. I could touch on bad data and infrastructure and change management, all the things. And these are all the services we provide, but the services that all these other providers are going to start bringing to the table around AI. But what I'm noticing is that you can't afford too many failures. Time is crushing people. You're losing a lot of ground. I think it was Harvey, the legal software, right, that raised $11 billion to pursue AI, built their entire AI solution, like say Zoom did, but they weren't successful like Zoom. They just pulled that back and I think dropped it 3 weeks ago. They pulled that product because the big models, I think it was OpenAI, was already doing a better job than their trained legal models on their platform. So $11 billion raised, huge product failure, no traction in the market, and how much ground have they lost? So now they're pivoting to services. So we're going to see a lot of that in those crashes. We're going to see a lot of messy scenarios, right, with companies as they're pivoting. Okay. So I want to talk through this last piece of evidence. I think it's the last one. Per seat economics. We're up here, and now let's maybe kind of zoom down. We know SaaS invented the per seat subscription, the entire ecosystem, right? Valuations, multiples, growth rates, comp plans. It was all built on that seat count. But now per seat is breaking. And I want to give you just a couple pieces of evidence, right? Clearly, that first one, ServiceNow shipping agentic ACV in April, half of their new contract value is now on non-seat based. We know that their targets jumped, and AI bundles are driving 20 to 30% of average price lifts. So Nick, Zoom has seat-based pricing, AI capabilities, AI companion at $10 to $20 per user. How are you thinking about the per seat economics inside Zoom, and what does the conversation sound like, internally when ServiceNow and other companies start shipping these agentic ACV?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, and Jason touched on this earlier. The economics of AI don't fit neatly into a per seat model. Historically, Zoom has priced on a per seat basis. You buy a license and you get access to AI companion. That worked when was tied to human usage, meetings, messages, but AI value scales with outcomes and not logins. So internally, we're asking, what's the right unit of value when the user may be an agent completing the work? That's why you're seeing us experiment AI companion at $10 to $20, as you mentioned, gives customers predictability and entry points, and you can get under the hood. And we're already modeling usage-based models and workflow-based pricing. But the goal is to make sure that the economics align with how customers actually consume intelligence and not just how they provision seats. You mentioned ServiceNow when they shipped agentic ACV, it validated the next wave. And Software revenue is measured by completed actions and not active users. And that just opens up a whole different can of worms. And
Yeah.
you talk about if you're in a two-tier model, how you do the pass-through. If you're in the traditional distribution, how are they going to bill for that?
Yeah,
So
Rod mentioned that.
the internal conversations sound a lot like the ones when we moved from hardware to UCaaS, and you got to keep it simple. Simplicity, customers love simplicity. But when you let the business model reflect the new physics of work, that's where it gets challenging. So, that's where we're headed, towards a world where AI isn't just a line item on a license. It's an engine with measurable outcomes that allow us to scale. But as Rod put it earlier, this is what keeps me up at night, is how do I move this partner ecosystem and spot those that are going to rise to the top while maintaining that base. And that's why I didn't touch the valuation conversation before. That's out of my swim lane as a lot of people watching our stock. I'm not going down that path. But how do you maintain that top line revenue and continue to demonstrate growth and move this thing at the same time? And that's it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And actually, Jason, I'm going to ask you to kind of go in a little bit more on that outcome pricing. But before, I just want to bring something up because, it's a little bit down the rabbit hole, but you made me think of it, Nick. Jason, is a product leader, and I've worked in product too. And, we've talked a lot about jobs to be done theory, right? And this is very inside baseball around product where, Clayton Christensen invented jobs to be done, and, how creating value and innovating is around getting a specific, let's call it a workflow done that has very specific desired outcomes that it delivers on, though. And, every particular workflow or job has up to 150 outcomes that customers are looking for. And, those are those desired outcomes. And the more you can deliver, that's the value that your solution to that job to be done, is evaluated, that value. And so, when we talk about outcomes and we talk about outcome-based pricing, my brain keeps going back to jobs to be done and how many of those desired outcomes are we fulfilling for a client. So Nick, as you're saying, what are we getting done? And then how do we monetize it? My brain goes to product management. So, going to the product leader, enterprise definitely has a preference for outcome-based pricing. It hit 21.7% in this year, reaching parity with seat-based pricing for the first time in the cloud era. So now Gartner is expecting 40% of contracts to include outcome-based elements by the year end. Third, this isn't just SaaS. Intercom charges 99 cents per AI resolved ticket, and Zendesk is charging $1.50 to $2. So if AI agents handle quality control on the factory floor, the per head model for industrial services changes too. So, we mentioned some of how all these services and the pricing around them are going to change. So if Goldman Sachs drafts an IPO prospectus in minutes now, advisory billing changes, right? Because it used to take 6 bankers 2 weeks to do that. Customer service and data entry point headcount is already down 15 to 20% at AI leading companies. So, Jason, from the investor seat, what does this kind of pricing model breakdown mean for portfolio valuations when you're modeling a SaaS company today? And we're getting specific about SaaS. And how is per seat parity changing the multiples you're underwriting?
So I think it's in flux. I think it is changing. I think, rightly or wrongly, I think a lot of elements in life in a 2x2 matrix. So if you think about the fundamental value of SaaS pricing as it relates to valuation, the 2 axes of the 2x2 matrix for SaaS pricing was very clear. Axis number 1, Nick, you touched on, which is predictability. One of the benefits of per seat pricing is it's very simple, predictable arithmetic. The other axis of the value of SaaS pricing was the durability of those products to begin with. As a system of record within either a segment of your operating model or sort of a layer of how you function as an organization, SaaS tools up until now were largely very, very durable, hence sort of the valuation built off of their retention rates. I think the challenge with AI and the challenge with outcome-based pricing is I don't think anybody's really hit on that secret recipe of what the 2x2 matrix of pricing value is for AI. Because if you compare it or you try to plot it against the SaaS matrix, it's actually not very good. Durability is very questionable in the world of AI because there's so many, such a plethora of new entrants. Plus, for especially, from a consumer perspective, people can probably relate to, bouncing between OpenAI and Claude, or bouncing between, one vibe coding tool to the next. It's very, very easy. Likewise, there is no predictability by definition when it comes to outcome-based pricing. So how do we kind of rebuild a similar kind of frame of value in the world of AI? And then, whoever hits on that secret recipe, I think, will be on the leading edge of the valuation conversations and ultimately probably on the growth conversations too.
It's a good point, but then, I'm going to point to Zoom and Nick, and, this is, and what Rod said around the big guys who've moved fast and changed their business models. You're creating that, let's call it a cornucopia of value, Nick. Like, you've got so much value because you changed the fundamental, value proposition that, you can maybe capture that durability, right? What do you think?
Without sounding too coy, this is a lively internal debate as to what that next gen looks like. And Rod hit the nail on the head. It's the challenges for the CFOs, ours included, is that how do you create that durability, predictability? You're measured on top line performance. You're measured on monthly active users. And those are the analytics that everybody's looking at. And so if you pivot too hard, you'll break the recipe. So it's how do you find accretive growth within the portfolio itself and create new revenue opportunities that are going to emerge from this. And that's incumbent upon us, which is why I'm a huge supporter of Rod's events, where we bring community of partners together to have this dialogue. So there's no, for us, and it goes back to what I shared earlier, the analyst asking, who do I fear from a competitive perspective? Not a particular company. It's the rate of change, and the acceleration of change is what we need to embrace as a community, and then spot those early adopters to bring us down that journey.
Yeah. I don't know, Rod, if you want to jump in or if that's put a button on it.
I think the key that we all need to look at is no company is going to do it on their own. They are going to need a partner ecosystem to enable them to do it. What people have got to have and develop is the right metrics, the right understanding of the partner community to understand who is going to help me get there, who can I help me get there, and who is not going to make it. And finally, there are a whole raft of new partners developing. What do they need from us in order to help us get to where we want to be? And we don't want to be in the position we were in the cloud, where due to loyalty, not millions or tens of millions, but possibly as much as $1 billion was spent by the tech industry trying to move partners to the cloud who were never, ever going to get there. And we need to build that understanding within our organization so our resources align with the partners who can help us in what is an incredibly transformative period.
I'll just add one final point to that. And the challenge for that emerging partner is creating IP that's scalable. And when you look at the creation of AI agents and how you write those prompts and all of the above, it's really the net of it. It's understanding the workflow and the predictability of the workflow. But then how do you apply IP to that? And that's where it gets very interesting. And I think a lot of that is yet to be unpacked.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a bit of a co-creation exercise too, because I'm wondering, your big companies are trying to create that IP at a product level, but a lot of that IP and that durability, I think, will come from the customer side of the equation, right? So, there's that new impetus to create platform level, but then also be able to collaborate with customers on their own workflow, so that it's unique to the value that they're creating for their own businesses, right? So just a whole other new thing that companies need to try to figure out how to do, right? So, all right, last piece of evidence, and we've talked about it a lot. Rod just touched on it: speed and the window, right? The window itself and how long it stays open. Back then, with the SaaS movie from 2001 to 2006, SaaS adoption went from 12 to 38%. Salesforce reached $1 billion in revenue, as I mentioned. AWS commoditized cloud infrastructure. The window closed, and SaaS became table stakes. Now, from 2024 to 2028, 75% of companies are investing in agentic AI. So, this is kind of a prediction, right? Based on numbers that we've got. Smart manufacturing is at 47%. The IT market is growing 10.2%, 2/3 of it through the channel. And the mid-market is the biggest land grab, right? The window is the same length as SaaS, but the technology is moving faster. The infrastructure is already commoditized. The vendors are pivoting in months instead of years. It cuts both ways. The upside is shorter to capture, but the downside is shorter to fix. So I'm going to go back to you, Jason. For someone running a business in any industry, what does moving in this window actually look like practically? What's the difference between an operator using the window and an operator just, hoping it stays open?
I think, again, it goes back to a comment that I made earlier, is, kind of internal adoption of the tools to sort of really understand in an authentic way the benefits. Time is of the essence. I think there's an interesting market dynamic that I've observed. I'd be interested to hear if Nick and Rod see the same. Is one difference when it comes to maybe the hype that's been created around AI is almost every customer is in market.